You're listening to Hustle and Heart, Defining Success on Your Own Terms, a podcast for the dreamers and go-getters who are building something real and refuse to leave the most important parts of themselves behind while they do it. I'm Vanessa, a brand strategist, founder, and your host. I sit down with women doing the kind of work that doesn't always make it onto the highlight reel, but absolutely should. This is where we have that conversation. Let's get into it. You know that moment when everything looks like success from the outside and you're the only one who knows the truth? Today's guest lived that. At 28, she built a business to $1 million in 3 years. Legit, I said 3 years. And she was exhausted, working 80 hours a week, carrying every decision, running on fumes. Most people would have pushed harder. Sailynn Doyle rebuilt. She redesigned her entire business from the foundation, system, structure, strategy. And what happened next? She more than tripled her revenue, cut her work week down to 16 hours, crossed 17 million in total revenue, and exited before 40. That is insane. I'm super excited to chat. But now she works with women who are ready to stop being the bottleneck in their own business. She's not here to talk about hustle or marketing hacks. She teaches scalable design because your growth should not cost you your life. Welcome to Hustle and Heart, Sailynn. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me, Vanessa. I am so happy to be here.
Your story is something that is like a fairy tale, entrepreneurs, go-getters, fairy tale, dream come true. How did this all start?
I wish the whole 10 years or 19 years in total was a fairy tale, but entrepreneurship is more like a roller coaster with your princess dress on, flying over your head. And so for me, entrepreneurship started in August of 2006. I was sitting on my boyfriend's boat. It was a warm, sunny Sunday. And the girl next to me said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Start my own business." Now, I think she meant for like dinner or drinks later, but that's what came out of my mouth. And the next morning, I walked into the office, Monday morning, that whole feeling. And there was an email in my inbox that said, "Have you ever thought of starting your own business?" And I was like, it's a sign from the universe. And what that was a franchise consulting company. And I looked at everything: smoothie shops, sub shops, closet design, everything that you could think of, even dog training. But nothing really hit. And then unfortunately, Thanksgiving weekend of that year, my boyfriend's father died unexpectedly at the age of 57. And that really shook my world and kind of said wow, life is short. If you want to do this, you should do it. And so 2 days before the end of 2006, I signed on the line to purchase a senior home care franchise in Massachusetts. And that started the roller coaster and I was off. So that's how I got started.
Wow. At what point, since you were trying over and over and over, was it that you realized I can't keep doing this?
Yeah, so such a good question. So my parents, average human beings, taught me I could have anything that I wanted in life as long as I worked for it. And then my franchisor said, say yes to everything and work hard. And so that's what I did for 3 years. But when you're a driven entrepreneur, we're a little extreme, right? We take it to the next level. And so 3 years of 80-hour weeks had me sitting in my car on a weekday morning, sobbing my eyes out at 9 a.m. because I had just completed another shift for a client where one of my caregivers had called out sick. And that was my draw a line in the sand moment. And I declared that something had to change. Now, see, prior, I think in all businesses in life, we kind of say oh, I'm going to fix that, or I'm going to work on that, or I'm not doing that anymore. But then we get busy or something happens and we eke back to our old ways. But that morning, something was different. As I was sobbing my eyes out, I should have been celebrating. We had just hit $1 million in revenue. And I should have been celebrating that amazing milestone that I don't know if you know, but only 2% of women entrepreneurs will hit a million ever. And I had hit it. I had no idea. And I truly declared like something has to change because I knew that I couldn't keep going at that 80-hour pace any longer. Mentally, physically, spiritually, I was exhausted.
Yeah, I feel like undeniably everyone that just works hard, really hard at what they love and what they've created knows what that feels like. I love hearing this because at the end of the day, you didn't quit, you just redesigned, and I would love to hear how that looked like in practice. Where did you start? How did that part look like?
Well, I definitely was burnt out. I was in total denial, right? Because I wasn't going to admit that I couldn't handle it. But after I, dried my tears that day, I went to my parents' house to shower and change. And because I had another 10 hours in front of me of work that I had to do myself, and my mom saw how I was, and as my biggest cheerleader, but also truth teller, she said, Sailynn, you need to meet with a family friend who's a coach. And honestly, that was kind of like a stab to my problem solver heart
Mm,
because I had always been one of those women who could figure it out, solve problems, think outside the box. And so to ask for help just seemed like, wow, how come you can't fix it? So I put the appointment on my calendar as busy and hidden in private. And when the day came, I skulked out the back door of my office, hoping no one would ask me where I was going, went down the plaza to this shady, dark diner. And I met with him and I basically said to myself, well, if you're so smart, and I vomited all of my problems for the next hour or so on him. And he listened and he said to me basically one thing. And he said, your business lacks systems. And I was like, how can all of those problems I just told you about that's causing me to work 80 hours come down to one thing, systems, right? So not really believing what he said, I went back to the office and I was like, okay, that was a waste of time. And that day, one of my team members asked me the same question that she had asked probably 100 times more. And instead of sticking a fork in my eye, I answered the question. And then that night at 5 o'clock, when things finally calmed down, my team left and I could finally get some real work done. I pulled up the system that she was supposed to be following. And what I realized was it was crap. So it was out of date, it was missing steps, and I had done a crappy job putting it together. So no wonder she wasn't following it, right?
yeah.
And so that night, I spent an hour redesigning that system. The next morning, I went into the office and I said to her, hey, can I meet with you for like 30 minutes? She came in, she asked me one question. I went through 3 things with her during that meeting. And I made the one edit to the document. I handed it to her and she walked out. And I was like, okay. Well, a couple weeks later, I was like, wow, she hasn't asked me like anything about that system. So I walked into her office and I said, hey, how's it going with the system? And she looked up and she was like, fabulous. And she went back to work. And literally, like, my jaw was probably hanging open. My mind was blown at that moment because in just 90 minutes, I had solved that problem that she had been asking me about for years prior. And I never once had her ask me that question again for the next 7 years until I sold the business, right? And so that really opened my eyes to, maybe that coach was right. And it did come down to systems. And so what I did over the next 2 years was I redesigned the entire foundation, like back end infrastructure of my business. And to test it in 2012, I took off for 30 days straight in the RV. Left the business. I was not attached to my phone. I was not on my laptop all day, and it didn't fall apart. And when I got back, I said to myself, what else is possible? And I
Yeah.
spent the next 5 years turning that into a well-oiled money-making machine that I sold after 10 years in business.
Wow. Very impressive. And let me ask you some things. For the women out there that are feeling stuck, what type of questions would you tell them to ask themselves? so that they can start seeing this in a different perspective too. Maybe they're too just stuck in the weeds.
Yeah, we're always, it's like one of those things, right? You know how when you have a conversation with a friend and she's telling you something and she's so frustrated and you can see clearly what the problem is? That's
Yeah.
the benefit of working with a coach, right? Because they can see the outside perspective that you can't. That's why that coach was able to tell me my problems with systems, right? But what I learned is when I started coaching in January of 21, because for the prior 10 years, women had said to me, how did you do it? How did you build a multi-million dollar business in 16-hour weeks? And I would always give them some kind of like flip answer, right? But when I sat down and created my signature framework, I realized it came down to 4 core pillars. And the first pillar has 3 pieces. And the first thing that I ask all clients is, what do you want? Because if you don't know what you clearly want, then you will build something that most likely you hate. That's just what it comes down to. So if you're feeling stuck at the moment, that first question of what do you want is where you really need to dig in. Now, I know this is really hard for a lot of women because think about it. Like when we were a kid, everyone asked us, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right?
Yeah.
And you said all the different things. I said a circus clown. My parents were very happy I outgrew that. But, it was one of those things where people stopped asking us what we wanted when we kind of got out of college, right? They figured like, you're an adult, you should have figured it out. And so for a lot of women, that's a really hard question. And so if you don't know what you want, tell me what you don't want. And then we'll reverse engineer what you do want. But once we know what you want, then we can build the business that supports it. If you don't have that clarity in knowing what you want, you will build something you hate or you will stay stuck trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Just thinking of old versions of myself in the beginning of my entrepreneurial stage, I would probably be freaking out hearing 18 hours. What? You know what I mean? Like I would be it would be really difficult for me to try to grasp that, especially if, in the early startup stages where you're super slim and they're wearing multiple hats, right? How do you approach that scenario? Maybe they haven't been able to create a system yet, but they're already feeling the effects of not having one.
Yeah, so that's such a good question. So I was working with a client about a month ago and she was inside of my signature program and she's like, okay, I got to the whole lesson on a 4-hour work week, a 4-hour work day. And she was like, Sailynn, I have to admit, like my first instinct was like, are you crazy? Like this is
Yeah.
impossible, right? Like right now I'm working like 12 to 16 a day, not, a week.
Yeah.
And I said, yes. But the thing about it is what I've realized, and there's so many studies on when you work in a corporate job, productivity, right? So if you work an 8-hour day, they've really found that productivity, most likely you're only productive 4 to 6 hours of the day. And so it's the same thing in business. What I find is most of the women that come into one of my programs is that they're busy all day, but they're not working on the things that actually move the needle in your business, right? So, in that first pillar that I teach in my 4-pillar program is that once we know what you want, we get really clear on what it is that moves the needle in your business, because those are the things that we do and we do first. And so once we get some clarity there, then we can kind of say, and a lot of women realize like, I haven't actually been doing the work to actually grow my business. And that's why I constantly feel busy, but not productive. Like I'm getting boxes checked off my to-do list and that makes me feel good, but it's not creating the revenue that I want, right? So when we look at like a 16-hour week, we're looking at 16 hours of work that actually produces results. Now, don't get me wrong though, right? There's times in business where you're going to have to sprint for a short period. See, I had sprinted for 3 years straight. That's why I was so burnt out. Now I think you shouldn't sprint longer than like 90 days because your brain and body can only handle, the long hours for so long, right? So if you've been sprinting longer than 90 days, then it's time to kind of do a reset. But, right now in my business, honestly, I've been in a sprint. I'm coming up to the end of mine because I was launching a new program, which then caused me to relaunch my signature program. And so I was recording, 100 videos and writing scripts and doing all of these kinds of things. But I know that in 2 weeks, my sprint is over and I'll write a blog about the experience, right? So if you are at that point to answer your question where it's like, what is my system? Once we know what you want, then we have to figure out what actually drives revenue in your business. So you're doing that.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot of clients that I've worked with, they don't know what they want and they start this journey not knowing what they want. And I feel like that is probably one of the hardest lessons you learn in your entrepreneur career of the biggest mistakes. It happens, right? At different times, but everyone figures it out eventually.
And it's, people say like, what are you passionate about? And so many people don't know, right? And I think it's just because of the way the world is. So one, people stopped asking us once we got out of college, right? So probably no one's asked us what we wanted in 20, 30 years. But two, it's one of those things where we're so busy all day long. We're in that whole like fight or flight all day. And that our brain doesn't have a chance to actually rest and really think about, well, what do I love to do in my life and in my work and in my career and business, right? Like we never take enough time to actually acknowledge, like, wow, I just had a conversation with a client and that lit me up,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so how do I go have more of those with that specific person? And that's why I released a new program in May is because what I realized is that there was this level of women around $1 million in business that just lit me up. And I was like, I love working with those women. And so I needed something specifically to serve them in addition to the program that I have for the women trying to get to their first million, right? And so they both light me up in different ways and they have my brain doing different things. And so that's really the opportunity. And so when women say, I don't know what I want, or they give me that vague answer, and we dig deep, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Toyota method, but Mr. Toyota, when there was something broken on the floor back in the day, he would ask his team to go 5 layers deep to figure out what the root cause of why, a car came off the floor and it didn't meet standards.
Mhm.
And so if we can't find it that way, then we'll go in backwards. I'm like, tell me what you don't like. Well, that list is usually ginormous, right? We all know what we don't like. And so then it's digging into it, right? It's like, okay, well, why don't you like that? Was it the person? Was it the situation? Like the topic, the industry, and then we can put together it is what they actually do like and want to do in their business.
Yeah. No, I think that's so crucial.
Yep.
Yeah, I have heard the onion layers. So it's the same concept, but it's just used differently, digging deep. Now, one thing that I really do want to ask you, because Sailynn, you have accomplished so much, so and such a, at a young age, you exited before 40, which is kudos to you in all the
Thank
ways, like all the ways. I bow. What did you learn about yourself in that process? Because that is a huge milestone. You work so hard. There has to be a level of like, whoa. Can you tap
Yeah.
into?
I thought the first 3 years of building the business into, burnout there was hard. The 6 months preparing for the sale was 10x harder. I had always had such an amazing relationship with my team. I had 17 women in my office and 150 out in the field. And to not be able to tell them what was going on behind the scenes was so hard for me, and to have like all of these secret meetings. But I realized that I can do hard things, that I actually know what I'm doing in business. I'm a lot smarter than I realized, and that nothing was going to stop me. Because here's the thing, most women start a business with no exit plan. I bought that franchise in 2007 with a 10-year exit strategy. It was a 10-year agreement, but I also knew myself, right? I knew my creativity and my commitment and consistency. I was like, okay, 10 years. And I sold it 10 years to the week.
Wow.
And it was because I had a strategy in place. And so now what I do with so many women is not only help them scale, but help them prepare for, a handoff to an office manager or general manager, maybe, the ability to get their operations in place so that way they can start a second business, or to prepare them for a sale, which is a 5-year strategy. But, just like I didn't realize back in 2010 when I was sitting in my car and I should have been celebrating the $1 million in revenue, I didn't realize only 2% of women did that. I didn't realize in 2017 when I sold how much of an accomplishment that truly was. And I think now that I'm in the coaching industry and I have a lot more statistics and facts around business in general, I realize how much of a process that really was, and how unique it is. And when I sold my business, I could have done a ton of different things, but it was really important for me to continue to make the biggest impact that I could make. And so coaching women, I figured, well, if I can coach them to create a business like I did, where they can set it up so they can live their life or exit or start something new, whatever it is, then their business will help others, and it'll just create that ripple effect, right?
Yes.
And so for me, that was the best option, where I could continue to create that impact, but on my terms, right? So working part-time hours, living an amazing life, and doing all those kinds of things. But I will tell you, the best moment from the sale was when the bank transfer went through the day after the sale, and it hit my bank, and it was a 7-figure exit. And I logged in and I showed it to my dad, who was an automotive teacher. So, didn't make a ton of money in his life. And his mouth was like, my gosh, like during the entire sale process, I don't think he ever asked me what we were selling the business for. And so when I showed it to him, he was so blown away. And that really that was like the moment, it still gets me like a little teary. He's gone now, but it was really like, wow, like I did something big.
Sailynn. Well, I'm sorry to cause the tears, but that's such a beautiful moment. I can thank you for sharing that. Yeah, no, I got the chills like just hearing you. Like I felt that with you for just a moment. That's beautiful. And I feel like that's gonna carry this is gonna carry your vision and mission until the end of time.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing, Vanessa, is, I'll leave your audience with this. I owned a senior home care franchise for 10 years, right? And I worked with many seniors when I was building that business, at the end of their life. And not one of them ever said to me, I wish I had worked more. They all said, I wish I had a better relationship with my spouse. I wish my kids were here caring for me instead of you. I wish, I had taken that trip. I wish, I wish, I wish. And to see these people at the end of their life who were paying me hundreds of thousands of dollars to care for them, with regrets, it really wakes you up in life. And so I think it's just important for me to share my stories, good, bad, and all in between, so that other women really realize you get one life and you want it to be epic, and we should be building businesses that support that goal.
I'm on that ride with you, Sailynn. I'm on
Yeah.
that ride with you. I love that. So for the women that are listening right now that are swamped with just layers of work in their business right now, what's one thing she can do this week to start creating some space?
That's such a good question. Once where I ask my clients, what do they want? I have them do a time study. And, we just go back to the basic of really looking at where you're spending your time and is it on the things that are really moving the needle? Because 99% of the women will say to me, I didn't realize how much time I was wasting on things that don't grow my revenue. And we're all focused on growth and revenue, even though money is not everything. It makes the world go round and we want to grow, but we want to spend our time on the things that are actually going to grow and put all the other shiny objects to the side until we get to the point where we can do something differently.
Yeah. So, Sailynn, how can someone reach you to work with you? Because you work virtually too, right?
You can, I know you're going to drop all of my information in the show notes, but the best place to connect with me is on social media. You can reach out to me on any social media platform. It's at Sailynn Doyle on all platforms. Send me a message. Let me know you heard me on this podcast and what was your biggest takeaway. And I will send you a free guide to help you get started on how to get yourself out of the situation that you're in with your frustration and really truly grow your business so it supports your one life.
I love that. And what do you want women to walk away with after working with you?
Want them to know that hustle isn't the only way, right? And you can build a business, you can build any business you want, and you can build it your way. You don't have to follow all the rules that they tell you have to do. Anything is truly possible in the world that we live in today.
I love that. Thank you so much for your time, Sailynn. And that's a wrap on this episode of Hustle and Heart. If something from today's conversation stayed with you, share it. Send it to the woman in your life who's in the middle of building something and could use a reminder that she's not doing it alone. Subscribe to get notifications on new episodes. I'll see you then.